So I'm going to start the webinar. This is the New Hampshire Legislative Panel, and want to welcome everyone. We have 51 registrants, and I see people starting to join in, and we are excited to see everybody. We miss these socials. This meeting has been set up as a meeting and not a webinar, so in case you do want to put your video on, we can all see each other. That was the intent, and if you have your video on and you want to change your picture, just hover over the three dots on your picture, and then you can rename yourself, because the default is to have you as your business name. So while you were doing that, I am going to give the copyright disclosure. One diagram we are going to be covering today is a step-by-step New Hampshire legislative process diagram prepared by the Northern Forest Center. So I just want to make sure that we give them credit, and it is available online through a simple Google search if you wish to get a copy of that. I also need to cover a recording disclosure, because this is being recorded at the request of some of the members who were unable to attend today, and it will be cleaned up, the ends, and will be cleaned up and posted to the NEWIEE website. And also, you are automatically muted on your end, but if you hear some static, please help us out and just make sure that things are muted. I'm sorry, who just said? Who was still there? Okay. With that, the chat box is open with the telephone number, meeting ID, and password. Please feel free to take a picture of that in case you have connectivity issues and need to call in. The telephone number is there, so you can quickly get back and join us. Also, please use the chat box for the Q&A. After our panel presents, we will have an opportunity to take questions, and we'd love to see those. So with those housekeeping things, let's start with our program. So our members asked for an event to explain how the New Hampshire legislative process works, and this is it. The legislative process can be confusing, especially with all the unique jargon, and sometimes a single issue can generate multiple pieces of legislation, such as this year when there were 5 House bills and 5 Senate bills that were introduced just on net metering alone. Our panelists will walk us through all this activity and give us some helpful insight into New Hampshire's process for making laws. They will explain at what junctures you and the public can be involved. And we are grateful to have an experienced panel to present to you today. Jody Grimbliss, Heidi Crowell, Madeline Minot, and Megan Hewlin are all leaders in this arena and on the issue of net metering. So let me begin with introductions. Jody Grimbliss, a 25-year veteran of New Hampshire government and politics. Jody started out in 1995 as a lead lobbyist and director of government affairs for a large Concord law firm. She grew the practice into one of the largest, most respected in the state. And in 2016, she founded her own company, J. Grimbliss Strategic Solutions. Sorry about that, Jody. And she is present. Jody represents clients before the New Hampshire legislature as well as before state agencies. She offers extensive experience in legislative, procurement, administrative, and regulatory issues. She is a contract lobbyist, and Jody represents many different industries. Today, we are focusing on her energy experience. Jody received her BA in Communications from UNH and her Master's in Political Communications from Emerson College in Massachusetts. She has been recognized by the Union Leaders 40 Under 40. Congratulations, Jody. And she has been featured on the cover of Business New Hampshire magazine as a top-rated lobbyist. So we are very happy to have her with us. Also happy to have with us is Heidi Crowell. Heidi has over 20 years experience in representing regulated utilities, renewable facilities, and energy consumers. Heidi is well-versed in public policy issues, legislative, regulatory matters relating to energy and environment. She also does healthcare, business strategies, and economic and market trends. Heidi regularly prepares in-depth research, testimony, and presentations before the New Hampshire legislature, as well as the New Hampshire Public Utilities Commission and New Hampshire Department of Insurance. Heidi presents and moderates at business forums on energy issues and is a regular at the New Hampshire BIA's annual energy seminars. Heidi is a past recipient of New Hampshire BIA's Above and Beyond Award. She's a former energy policy analyst with the Governor's Office of Energy and Community Services, and is a former research associate from Telus Institute in Boston. And she holds a BA in economics, magna cum laude, from Smith College. And our next panelist is Madeline Minot. Madeline, thank you for joining us. She is Executive Director of Clean Energy New Hampshire. She joined Clean Energy in 2018. Prior to that, Madeline was the Waterways Manager for the City of Nashua. She has also co-chaired the Granite State Hydropower Association, so she has net metering from that perspective. Madeline has been following the net metering issue and in the legislature, and will be very insightful on that issue today. Madeline received her BA in Biology and Environmental Policy from Colby College and received her PhD from Idaho State University. Welcome, Madeline. Next on our panel is Megan Hewlin. Megan is with Revision Energy. She joined that company in 2015. Revision has more than 8,000 clean energy projects that it has placed in service since 2003. Revision is the region's most experienced solar company, and Revision is an employee-owned and a certified B Corporation. Congratulations to Revision. Revision prides itself on being part of a global movement using business as a force for good to solve social and environmental issues. Megan has worn many hats since joining Revision, but she has primarily worked with customers, utilities, and the New Hampshire Public Utilities Commission on solar projects across New Hampshire. Megan is part of Revision's Brentwood management team, and Megan is a New Hampshire native and deeply familiar with New Hampshire's net metering policy, and she has helped many commercial, institutional, and residential customers navigate the myriad of state and federal programs promoting solar. Megan earned her BA in French language and literature from William Smith College, and after receiving her BA, she spent a year living and working in Quebec City. I probably have mispronounced, is it Quebec? And Megan is a 2017 graduate of Leadership Seacoast. Welcome, everybody. So as our attendees can see, we have quite an experienced panelists, and without any further delay, I will then hand the presentation over to Jody, and Jody, just signal me when you want me to put up the legislative event slide.
Sure. Thank you first, Marcia, for inviting me to be on this panel, and thank you everyone for attending this panel. Hopefully the information we give you today on the legislative process is easy to digest, easy to understand, and of course, happy to answer questions anytime somebody has one. I think Marcia has my contact number, so if somebody needs something, please feel free to call me. Again, I'm Jody Grimbalis. I'm a contract lobbyist, meaning I represent more clients than just one. I work in, that is a phone in my house, sorry about that. I work in fields of healthcare, information technology, real estate, public safety, and of course, energy. About my energy client experience over the years, I've worked with a number of different groups over the years in my career. I've done work with ISO New England for several years. I currently also work with the biomass renewable energy plants in the state. And just for fun and to date myself, I worked with Enron during the restructuring time. So it's been a very quite eventful career, and I enjoy my work in the energy space. What's interesting when you look at different clients is that you have sometimes different roles. So for a group like ISO New England, it'd be more monitoring and being a resource for that organization, bringing what that organization has for information and background and presentations to the legislature, to the executive branch. In my role for biomass, really it's been significant advocacy and lobbying type work. So introducing bills, passing them through the legislature, getting them vetoed by the governor, overriding a governor's veto, not overriding a governor's veto. It's been a very It's been a very rocky road over the years, and quite honestly, we've all learned a lot, and we've all used every bit of that legislative process. It can be a complicated process, and Marcia is right, it does have its own jargon, but just like every industry, you get to know the jargon, you know the vernacular, and you can understand the process. But that said, it's a very open process in New Hampshire. There are multiple opportunities for public input. We are a small state, and so I hope what you take away from this presentation is that you have an ability to have a voice in this process, no matter what your views may be. So although it may sound a little complicated, it's open. So hopefully you'll get that through the presentation. Marcia, if you want to put that slide up, I'll just walk briefly through the legislative process, and then I'll turn it to Heidi to kind of put the legislative process in context of the net metering issues that you'll talk about.
There. Can everyone see the diagram?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So New Hampshire runs by, basically we look at the legislative process in a biennium, 2 years. When someone is elected, so we have elections coming November 2020, when somebody gets elected as either a state senator or state representative in November 2020, their term runs for the next biennium, basically 2021 and 2022. So they meet yearly, even though it's a 2-year biennium, they do meet annually. They generally meet for about 6 months of the year. The major session is from January to June each year, and then there is times where we could have special sessions in the fall, or we'll have kind of study work taking place in the fall before the next session comes around. So starting at kind of the beginning of the process, the first step for a legislator is to file a bill. We call them bill titles at first, also known as legislative service requests. So you might hear the slang LSRs. You know, Senator, can you file an LSR for me? It's basically a bill title that is a placeholder for which a bill will become. How a legislator determines what bills to file can come from a number of different places. They may get a call from a constituent. They may have a personal passion on an issue that they'd like to see addressed. They may get a call from an organization or a company or a cause group, state agency seeking help filing a bill. So only a legislator can file a bill, but the motivation or the folks behind that bill can come from a number of different places. House members, state representatives file House bills, and Senate members file Senate bills. It does not preclude them just because a senator files a Senate bill. They can still be a co-sponsor, even on a House bill, and vice versa. So you can generally file a bill starting in the fall for introduction in January when that session kicks off. You know, when you're a lobbyist, some of the tricks of the trade is if I have an organization or a client that wants to file a bill, what's important to me is not just getting one person to file that bill, but I'm going to be very choosy about who files a bill. I like to see bipartisanship on a bill. I like to see a broad characteristics of legislators supporting a bill, House members, senators, Democrats, Republicans. So there's a lot that goes into really even the thought process and strategy of filing bills as you get into that process. The second step is that bill being introduced. So as that bill gets introduced to the body, it'll be sent to a committee, whether it's in the House or the Senate. So if it's an energy bill, it's going to go to the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee in the House. Generally, that's where all of the energy bills go. If it's a Senate bill, it's going to go to the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. That is the committee that, again, houses most of the energy issues that come before the legislature. Once it's sent to a committee, the next step will be to schedule a public hearing. Unlike other states, even states surrounding us like Massachusetts, in New Hampshire, every bill has to have a public hearing. So where a bill may be filed in, say, Massachusetts, that bill may never come to a public hearing. In New Hampshire, it has to. So New Hampshire has a public hearing. Public members, anyone is able to speak, whether you're an organization, a public member, a citizen, a state agency, etc. Once that public hearing is held, there may be time for subcommittee work sessions, generally more in the House than the Senate. And then finally, once the committee has kind of taken its time, they usually have deadlines to work by, they will have to have a committee vote called an executive session, where the committee will make a recommendation to the full body, whether it's the House or the Senate, on what should happen with that bill. Should it ought to pass? OTP is what they call it. Should it pass, but it needs an amendment to fix some problems? Should it be inexpedient to legislate, which is the vernacular for killing the bill? Or depending on the whatever year the biennium is, it's sent to study in some way, whether it's retained for study or interim study. That motion depends on the year that we're in. That committee vote is very important, because when it goes to the full body, imagine you're one of the 400 members of the House. You may serve on another committee like education. You may not know what's going on in the Science and Technology Committee. So to have that 20 people on that Senate Science and Technology Committee do the necessary work and the necessary study, if they recommend strongly that a bill should pass, as a member of the House, you're probably going to follow their recommendation, because you may not have all the background, but they certainly have done the research and the work. So after the committee does a recommendation, it goes to the full body for a vote, and the full body can either support the recommendation or they can overturn it. I'd say about 80% of the time, the House will follow the committee's recommendation. The next part we're going to get to after that happens is what is kind of the red balloon in the red circle on the document is crossover. Crossover is basically the bills that have gone through the process so far, had their public hearings, had their committee votes, had their full body votes. Those bills that are still alive cross over to the other body. So bills that are killed or sent to study do not. But the bills that are still alive move on to the other body, and the whole process repeats itself. If it's a House bill going to the Senate at crossover, now the Senate committee has hearings on that bill. So again, you get another opportunity to come and speak to your issues. More public hearings will be held, potentially more subcommittees will be held. Again, committee recommendations will take place, and finally there'll be another vote of the full body. So in New Hampshire, we always say it's harder to pass a bill than to kill a bill, because you have to go through a very long process with a lot of eyes looking at every piece of the process along the way to get something to actually become law. Once that full body votes, that second full body votes, if there are differences between what the House passed and the Senate passed, there's an opportunity for reconciliation, where you get a couple of members of the House, a couple of members of the Senate, and they will take a look at it to see if they can kind of negotiate a compromise, or decide, well, we're going to all go with the House version or all go with the Senate version. That's called a committee of conference. That is generally will take place towards the end of the session, say like May. Once they come out with either a recommendation that they've able to agree, and this is what they want the final version to look like, both bodies have to adopt that. If they don't agree, the bill dies. If neither body adopts it, the bill dies. So once you get through that process and find an agreed upon version, that's what goes to the governor's office. The governor has three choices. He can sign it, he can not sign it and let it become law without a signature, or he can veto it. And he has certain time frames by which he has to act. If the governor does veto the bill, which obviously we've seen on a couple of pieces of energy legislation in the past couple of years, the legislature generally comes back in the fall and determines what they want to do with the veto. Do they want to sustain the veto, or do they want to override the veto? It takes 2/3 to override a governor's veto. It's a very high bar, and it's very hard to do. That generally, I'm just looking at the time, that generally is the process, the legislative process. I think maybe now, Marsha, I'll turn it to Heidi to kind of take that process and put it into context of more net metering, if that makes sense.
Yep, perfect, perfect. We'll now hear from Heidi. Thank you so much, Jody.
I think you can take off the slide too.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I too want to thank Marsha for inviting me to participate in this, and thank everyone for joining on a Thursday afternoon. I very much appreciate the opportunity to chat with everybody, answer questions afterwards. So again, my name is Heidi Crowell. I work at Gallagher, Callahan and Gartrell. I've been there for nearly 20 years. I represent a variety of clients in energy and environment, healthcare, long-term care, elder law, as well as a variety of kind of business interests as well. With respect to energy and environment, I represent the Granite State Hydropower Association, which is the New Hampshire's association of very small scale hydro facilities that are 5 megawatts or less. I also represent the Monadnock Paper Mills, which is a paper mill here in Bennington, New Hampshire. They have 3 small hydro facilities that help power their mill, and I represent them on energy and environmental as well as other business related issues. I've represented GSHA for about 15 years and Monadnock for over 5. I'll just generally say that, you know, I think with respect to contract lobbyists, you know, the reason we get hired is to be eyes and ears for folks, you know, at the State House and advocates as well, depending on what a client might be looking for, whether it's just monitoring or actually being actively involved to either pass legislation or perhaps try to prohibit a piece of legislation from becoming law. You know, these businesses have discovered that, you know, the policies set there, the laws, the rules, the regulations can really have an impact on their cost of doing business, the market opportunities that they have, just the maybe technological ability to comply with something. And so they have discovered that, you know, being involved is very critical. Especially depending on what your business is, and if it's in energy and environment, there could be big implications. In terms of what's involved in lobbying, Jody gave a really great overview. I would just, one of the things I would add is to say that, you know, a lot of it is about building relationships with legislators, getting to know who they are, what's important to them. You know, whether, you know, if you're talking about for example, a piece of energy or environmental piece of legislation, you know, one person might be very interested in environmental impacts. Another person might be very interested in economic development. Another person might be very interested in energy independence. And so depending, you know, getting to know legislators really can help guide your discussion with them about certain aspects of a bill that may help either gain their support or help them to decide that they are not in favor of a piece of legislation. So now I'll turn to the some bills and kind of how they fit into the process that Jody described. As folks may know from reading the press over the years, expanding net metering has been of great interest. We had a piece of legislation in 2018, which was SB 446. The idea was to expand net metering, raise the cap from 1 megawatt up to 5. That piece of legislation was ultimately vetoed, and we were not able to do a veto override. The same thing happened in 2019. We had House Bill 365 in that example, same course of action. It was vetoed and the veto was sustained. In 2020, we had 2 bills, and I'll just kind of quickly walk through, you know, how they fit into the process. We had House Bill 1218 and House Bill 1402. House Bill 1218 was sponsored by Representative Moffitt, who's a Democrat from Canterbury. And so the day after the unsuccessful veto last September of veto override of House Bill 365, he immediately filed what Jody was describing, a bill title, the LSR, to kind of reserve the place for a piece of legislation for this upcoming session. Similarly, on the Republican side, one of the House Republican members, Representative Lang, was interested in sponsoring his version of an expanded net metering bill. That was House Bill 1402. And when we saw that LSR pop up, we, like other stakeholders, reached out to him and participated in the process very early on in terms of talking with him about what he was thinking for the language in his bill, giving him some ideas, some feedback. You know, he was doing that with a variety of stakeholders, so we certainly weren't the only ones he was talking with, but it's just an example of you can get involved very early on in the process to help shape what a piece of legislation might even look like. Those 2 bills had public hearings. They were both House bills, so they started out in the House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee. They had hearings early in the process in January. And again, as another example, you know, once we saw that the hearings were scheduled, one of the things that a lobbyist will do is to reach out and try to figure out Who else is going to be testifying, coordinating with advocates, other interested parties to find out what they might be saying, making sure that the message might be coordinated, but maybe you're not being duplicative of what's being said, and making sure that the right information is being shared with the members of the committee in the public testimony, which can be both oral as well as written or both. As Jody was saying, following that, there's typically work sessions, subcommittee work sessions that are scheduled, or can be full committee work sessions that are scheduled. And the same sort of thing happens where we would be working with committee members, sharing information with them, trying to find out what direction that they might be headed, trying to encourage them to head in maybe one direction and not another. So there's work in that process as well. Once the executive sessions happen, the votes are taken, decisions are made. In the case of these two bills, House Bill 1402 as a vehicle was sent to interim study, but the language from it was actually lifted and rolled into House Bill 1218. Not something that we always see, but it certainly sometimes happens if there's multiple pieces of legislation dealing with the same topic. Legislators, committee members might kind of pick and choose what they want to pull from different bills and kind of craft something that way. That House Bill 1218 did come out of committee. It went to the House floor, passed there. And in this case, it went to a second committee. It went to the House Municipal and County Government because there were aspects of that bill that were of interest from municipal and county perspectives. And we do sometimes see bills go to a second committee. Another example is sometimes when bills have a fiscal note or financial impact associated with them, they might go to the House Finance Committee or the Senate Finance Committee as a second committee to actually look at those types of impacts. So it does happen. It came out of that committee with an amendment and would have typically gone to the House floor for a second vote. But of course, we had COVID-19 and the shutdown of businesses, and the legislature was part of the shutdown as well. That happened in the middle of March, around March, I think around March 16th, legislative activities were suspended. By the time folks came back in June and another House session was held in the middle of June, deadlines had passed. And in order to set new deadlines, the rules need to be suspended based on a 2/3 vote of the House. And that 2/3 vote was not accomplished. And so the outcome, at least for this year with respect to House Bill 1218, is that it is dead as well. There is only one remaining bill that was a holdover from last year, SB 159. The governor has vetoed that bill. The Senate has overridden the veto. And at some point, the House will take that veto up for a vote. So with that, hopefully I stuck within my time allotment, and I look forward to the questions after everyone else has spoken. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Heidi. And now we'll turn to Madeline. Madeline, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called Clean Energy New Hampshire. And we are a membership-based organization. We have business members, individual members, and municipal members. And we work on policy, education, and advocacy on all things related to renewable energy, energy efficiency, all things clean tech, including clean transportation. So that's a lot of subject matter and a lot of people that are our members and businesses. And I'm a registered lobbyist, just like Jody and Heidi, but instead of representing a variety of clients, I represent my organization's mission and the interest of my members before the legislature. So it's a little bit different. One of the things that's different is that I have to determine what our position is on different bills. So I can't just go to one specific client and explain the bill and what it would do and say, okay, what do you think about that? Is that good for your business or bad for your business? Because, for example, we have 130 business members. I can't, for every bill that we're tracking, go and ask all 130 of them, right? So we have certain ways that, for example, we have a solar working group that has representatives from large solar developers, residential solar developers, different types. And so I can go to my solar working group and get advice from them. But sometimes a bill one member says, I would support that, and one member says, I wouldn't support that. And so we also have a variety of different industries represented, not just solar. We have hydro members. We also have energy efficiency contractors. And so it gets a little complicated. So generally, we try to make a call and represent generally the interest of our members. And as I said, also what would advance our mission. A lot of times it's very clear cut whether we should support something or not. But sometimes when there's differing opinions between our membership, we won't take a position on a bill, and we'll say that, and we'll just present information from the industry's perspective and from the interest of our members to the legislature. So as well, we also, as a nonprofit, provide some of the services that a lobbyist would provide to their clients as a public service. So Heidi was mentioning that someone hires a lobbyist to be their eyes and ears. And so we do that, but we report some of it just to our members, and then we report some of the things we find out publicly. So we have a website, and there's a big policy section. So as the session is starting, we've done some of the same work that lobbyists do. So we may ask legislators to introduce certain bills that we want to see. And then once all the bills come out, we look through all of the bills that have been introduced, and we pick out all the ones that we think might be of interest to the topics that we follow. So everything related to renewable generation, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, things like that. And we put them all on our website. So we say, here's everything that we are going to be following this session. People can just go look at our website and see, oh, look, there's a bill that's proposing to, change the way net metering is done. Oh, there's a bill that's proposing to put a new fee on electric vehicles and things like that. So we put all of that up on our website. And then during the session, every Friday morning, we send out a policy update email. And it, for those bills that we're tracking, it reports everything that happened at the legislature on any bill we're tracking the past week. And it reports what's coming up next week at the legislature. So if a bill's having a hearing, we'll list it there. If a bill is going to be voted in the House, it's going to be listed there. And that's a way to keep our members informed. And it's also a way to turn them out to a hearing. So if there's a bill on a hearing we're interested in, we will notify them in that policy update, but we also will probably actively reach out to them and say, hey, there's a hearing next Tuesday, because the turnaround is really short. The calendars come out on Thursday evening usually. And a lot of times there'll be a hearing Tuesday morning. And so business people are really busy. They're not paying attention. So, this is not a top of their priority list to be following what bills and hearings are coming out. So we'll actively reach out to them and say, hey, there's a bill I think you're really interested in, would affect your interests. And it would be really great if you could either show up and explain how this bill would affect your business, or write an email to the committee members to explain how this bill would affect your business. So we do that both with our policy updates and then direct contacts. We also have weekly policy conference calls for our members. So also on Fridays, it's an opportunity for me to give a verbal update about what's going on in the legislature for all the bills we're interested in, and then a time to answer any questions that folks have. We're also the New Hampshire contact for some regional organizations. So NECC, which is Boston-based, we report to them everything that's going on in the legislature so they can inform their members regionally, because they cover all of New England, but they don't have staff located in New Hampshire. So we partner with some regional organizations to be their eyes and ears on New Hampshire policy. And at the same time, they keep us, who are very focused only on New Hampshire, what's going on in the region, which is very useful. And then we have webinar series just like these. So we have our Local Energy Solutions webinar series. So we do usually a middle of the session policy update, and then a policy wrap up at the end. We have a conference in the fall where we usually have some legislative policy sessions where we discuss a lot of that. So we work mostly on energy. I mean, it's all energy related, but our members' interests actually span multiple committees. So a lot of folks, and we get to know really well, the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in the Senate and the Science, Tech, and Energy Committee in the House. But because we're doing a lot with electric vehicles, we might end up at Public Works and Highway or transportation. Our members with renewable energy are interested in property taxes, and so we might end up on some tax bills. We're very interested in building codes and safety codes because that affects how energy efficient buildings are and how you're allowed to put a solar system on a roof, for example. So we'll end up at administrative departments and administration. So there's all sorts of committees that, and then there's the second committees that Jody mentioned, where a bill might start out at the Energy Committee, but then because there's some parts of it, it'll go to a second committee. So we actually end up covering a lot of the different committee hearings. So I'll just go a little bit, we've been talking about net metering, but we didn't do a sort of 101 of what net metering is and why you keep hearing about it. So net metering is simply if you own a certain type of eligible renewable energy generator, it means that you are allowed to connect to the grid and receive a credit on your bill for when you are generating more energy than you're consuming on site. And there are two different kinds of net metering. There's regular net metering and there's what's called group net metering. So group net metering is what enables projects like community solar. So you may be able to put a larger solar array in one location and do what's called group net meter. Some other states call it virtual net metering. So you are able to generate credits by the generator and distribute those credits to the bills of the members that are part of it. So those are two different types of net metering. People generally think about solar when we talk about net metering, but small hydros in New Hampshire participate in net metering by being group net metering hosts. Wind could be a if it was small enough, a wind generator could also be it, as well as other types of renewable generation. A lot of the issues that have been debated recently in the bills that Heidi gave an example is what types of generation projects are eligible to participate in net metering. So currently, the peak capacity generation can only be up to 1 megawatt. So if you are 1.01 megawatt, you cannot participate in net metering at all. And that's been a misconception as well. People think, oh, well, if you're 2 megawatts, your first megawatt could be part of net metering and your second megawatt can't. You can't split a project like that. You're either in or you're not. And so that's been a big debate, as well as the value of the credit that you receive. So some of our neighboring states are much more generous in the credit that they give to net metering facilities. A few years ago, there was a proceeding at the Public Utilities Commission that my organization was very involved in that set the second generation of net metering credits. And so currently the credit splits between two categories of projects. Small projects which are in capacity up to 100 kilowatts. They would receive a credit. If you're familiar with your electric bill and you look at the different types, they get the energy credit, they get the transmission credit, 25% of the value of the distribution credit. They are never credited their customer charge, any of what's called non-bypassable charges, so like a system benefits charge or things like that. So you could never not pay anything. There's always going to be some parts of your bill that you have to pay as a net metering customer. And then there's the large customers, customer generators, which are 100 kilowatts to 1 megawatt. And those customers are only credited the energy portion of the bill. So that represents only about half your bill. So again, you're paying full distribution, full transmission, customer charge. If you're a C&I customer, you're paying a demand charge probably, and the credit for net metering is only the energy portion of the bill. So the value of those credits is a lot of what's debated as well. If that should be changed, if that should go up, if we allow larger systems over a megawatt, should they also be able to have that credit or should it be a different credit? So with that, I will pass it on to Megan.
Thank you very much, Madeline. Megan, your perspective, please.
Thank you. And thanks again for having us participate. So I was just going to start off with a quick introduction to Revision Energy and who we are as a stakeholder in the legislative process and why we get involved and care about policy and legislation. We're a mission-driven renewable energy contractor, and we install a range of systems to support a solar-powered household or a solar-powered business. So it includes solar heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, electric vehicles, and battery storage. We have 2 New Hampshire branches, and we also operate out of 3 states, Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. We feel pretty strongly that there's an environmental imperative to the clean energy transition, so we support policy and legislation that's in alignment with that, and that includes policies that lead to reduced CO2 emissions in the region, that help promote local clean energy job growth, and that lead to increased solar adoption. So all of these things really allow us to accelerate our mission and also see a lot of benefits for the states that we work in as well. As a company, we get involved with policy really out of necessity. It's very important for us to be aware of and involved in what's happening on a state level in order to successfully run our business. And that's because these policies affect our day-to-day. They affect what we can build and where we can build it and who's going to buy it from us. So how financially feasible or attractive it is for our customers and what the payoff on their investment looks like. So when developed correctly, the policy can really drive markets and promote investor consistency in our state and bring money in for clean energy development. And it can also help us predict where markets are going to grow and what directions we might want to look at next. So in short, it can grow our industry, and it can also do the opposite and curtail it. So we've seen both happen over the years, especially across our territories, and especially with regards to net metering as well, because it has such a large effect on solar. And one of the things that has actually allowed us to remain resilient in the face of sometimes unfavorable policy changes is the fact that we have done business in 3 states. And usually things are okay in other states when they are not so great in one. So that's a help. Let's see. Our legislative priorities this year have been largely based around growing the market for commercial solar in New Hampshire and making it more available to small business. Raising the cap from 1 to 5 megawatts has been the issue that's been getting a lot of attention, and it's one that we support as well. The other piece of legislation that was important to us this year was increasing the limit on a small scale generator. As Madeline was saying, with the net metering, that's that 100 kW cap, where you start to see a sharp decrease in net metering value once you go past that. So we would really like to see that increase to 500 kW to help promote solar among small businesses and companies that would be installing systems of that size. And so thanks, Madeline, for the great explanation of the difference in compensation as you kind of go up the scale on size. From a business perspective, like having those drop downs at the 100 kW and then at the 1 megawatt range, what it does and what it means for our market in New Hampshire is that, you know, a lot of our schools, our nonprofits, our small businesses that are looking to invest in solar have to stick with smaller system sizes to stay under that 100 kW cap to maintain a viable investment. And because unfortunately, unless you're a manufacturing facility and you have a high consistent daily load and, you know, it happens to roughly line up with the sun, it's very difficult to install a system that will take care of your yearly needs entirely behind the meter. So with solar, one of the things that's important for offsetting a full load is taking advantage of the full monthly and yearly cycles, which unfortunately means for these places that are eager to invest in solar and want to save money and help the environment and ultimately would be installing these systems that reduce system load and reduce demand charges and related transmission costs and benefit ratepayers in that way by putting solar on the grid in the times when it's most needed, you know, these hot summer days when everyone's turning on their AC and all that. They end up having to install these smaller systems or aren't able to move forward at all. So we see less of a market for commercial in New Hampshire than we do in our neighboring states. Let's see. Especially coming out of a pandemic, we feel that solar is an important part of the recovery plan and that it can help businesses start saving money now and jumpstart much needed jobs. According to Green Tech Media in New Hampshire, we have 0.7% solar penetration, and that's the lowest of all our New England states. And the value of our net metered solar credit is also lower than our neighbors as well. So that has had the effect of having a much lower direct solar investment here in New Hampshire. And especially compared to places like Vermont and Massachusetts that have been more forward looking in their solar policies. So in that vein, and with the results coming out of the legislature this session, with most of the bills that we are interested in are now dead, we feel we are now kind of like we need to be looking more longer term and at a greater overarching energy policy. So our focus has kind of shifted back to laying the groundwork for that and for policies that we'd like to see, and starting to increase that awareness and education. We know that things can shift pretty rapidly once the legislative tides are favorable. We saw that happen in Maine over the past couple of years with the repeal of gross net metering and the institution of a new, more favorable net metering policy. The commercial solar market there has really taken off, and there's been a lot of investment in that state, and we've expanded an entire division in our company to support those projects and construction, even with the pandemic happening. So the legislation has a huge impact on what we do and how we're able to do it. A little bit on how we do get involved with that process. For us, it's really all about education. We're the experts in solar and what we need for our business. So it's up to kind of reach out to our policymakers and let them know what we need and raise awareness and give them education on that. We have multiple touch points throughout the process to make sure that we're continuously making sure our voice is heard. We do this in a few ways. We invite policymakers to our shop to learn what we do. We work on building relationships in Concord. We have a couple of people on our staff that are skilled at that. And we also work with a lobbyist and with groups like Clean Energy New Hampshire to represent our interests on legislation that's important to our business. And then finally, we rely on kind of direct action and individual action. I think we recently sent a report to legislators about our kind of the status of our business after COVID, because COVID has had such an effect on so many businesses. There's kind of just like let them know how things are, what we need to going forward to jumpstart our work. And then finally, we rely on our solar community and our customers. If there's something in the legislature that affects them, we let them know and ask them to give their senators and congressmen and women a call, because that does make a difference. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Marcia. Thank you.
Great. Do you mind if I start off with the question? And anyone who has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat box. But I do have a question on Megan, to just follow up. You mentioned that Vermont and Massachusetts are differing. Could you just, on this issue of net metering, where are they?
Yeah.
It seems like New Hampshire's tanked, but.
No, not at all. But so for comparison, I guess I have some numbers here. So for under 100 kW systems, New Hampshire pays like 10 to 12 cents per kilowatt hour for a net metered solar credit. And then once you're over 100 kW and up to 1 megawatt, you get like 8 to 9.5 cents. Massachusetts has a different structure. They have a feed-in tariff that pays about 25 cents per kilowatt hour for 25 kW to 250 kW installations, and 21.5 cents for 250 to 500 kW installations. So that number is nearly twice the amount. And Vermont, which does have net metering, pays 15.4 cents per kilowatt hour for under 500 kW. And then, yes, for under 500 kW. So
it makes much more economic sense in those programs than it does presently in New Hampshire. Is that the bottom line?
Right. It affects the number of years that it takes to pay back your initial upfront investment.
Yeah, yeah. Madeline, do you mind if I ask you, on the net metering issues, what do you see as the roadblocks to any success? I realize I'm asking you a huge question with a limited amount of time, but I just thought I would.
Well, it's been different every year. As Heidi mentioned, we've been many years into this, and each bill each year has had a little bit of a different path, and the arguments against it have been a little bit different. And so it actually, the bill that was introduced 3 years ago, SB 446, was prime sponsored by a Republican senator, and it had come out of a study committee that he had formed the year before to look at how to take control of energy costs in the state. And it had been mentioned at that study committee that, one of the issues is rising transmission costs, and we should really look at more distributed generation and potentially allowing larger net metered facilities. And that had sort of put a bug in his ear and some of the other legislators, as well as a House member that was on that committee. And they ended up introducing that bill. And so that was a time where both the House and Senate had Republican majorities. And so that bill was sponsored by Republicans, made it through House and Senate that had Republican majorities, but was vetoed by the governor, which is the same governor we have now. And then we couldn't override a veto then. There was an election in between, right? And then we all of a sudden had Democratic majorities in the House and Senate. We had multiple bills that were introduced last year. The bills still had really strong bipartisan support. The opposition has always been the idea of costs. So as I mentioned, we argue about the value of the credit and whether or not the credit that was determined by the Public Utilities Commission would be appropriate for larger systems or not. That's been the governor's justification for vetoing the bills. He's concerned that if we have more net metered facilities, which would certainly happen if we allowed larger systems to net meter, that it would potentially create a cost shift. Most of the concerns from that come from states that have net metering credits twice the value of ours. So, we certainly work really hard, and I work closely with a lot of other lobbyists and our members to dispel that, what we think is misinformation, right? But we argue back and forth with some of our opponents. And then this year, the situation was totally different, where we, the main net metering bill lost a lot of its bipartisan support, and we were in a different position. And it's, even if we hadn't had the COVID pandemic and the suspension in the legislative activity, I'm not sure that that bill would have, that bill was losing support as it was going along. And it is in part because the governor came out with what he called his clean energy plan, and it was offering an alternative to take a baby step and, maybe just support municipal projects being allowed to be larger and participate in net metering. So when you give legislators more choice, they can all of a sudden, oh, well, I'm going to support this net metering bill. Like you said, when there's 10 different net metering bills, you can fragment their support across a wide variety of choices. And so you don't have that rallying around, well, if we want to advance net metering, we have to support this bill. So I think that's a little bit of what happened this year.
Okay. All right. Heidi, I have a question for you. When you were talking about how you interfaced with, was it Representative Moffett, Canterbury, with the early LSR? Because Heidi had talked about the session being from January to June, worked sometimes special sessions in the fall and committees, and LSRs I know go into the fall. What time of year did Moffett file this so that you could jump on it?
Yeah, it depends on whether you're in the first year of the biennium or the second year of the biennium, so that the timing is a little bit different. But in the first year of a biennium, because you do have newly elected legislators as well as even incumbents, if they're running, they don't know if they're going to win or not. So the schedule is a little bit different. If it's the second year of the biennium, then things get filed a little bit earlier. But yes, so, the first step is with the filing the bill title. And then there's time between when the title is filed and when the actual bill text needs to be filed. And so, if you're watching the bill title list come along, when you see something that's of potential interest to you, you certainly are welcome and probably encouraged to reach out to the prime sponsor of that bill and try to find out what they're thinking. Do they have language? Are they interested in help with the language? And to kind of work with them in the process. And as Jody was saying, if you're proactively trying to get something passed, then you've probably even been working with a prime sponsor and some co-sponsors even well before the filing of the title.
Okay, thank you. Jody, I have a question for you. This is more of a logistics thing. We know with Madeline's organization, she's their eyes and ears. If someone doesn't have a lobbyist and they're just trying to find out when hearings are, you mentioned House and Senate calendars. Where do people go to get those or see them?
Good luck. No, I'm just kidding. So there is a legislative website. If you go to the www.nh.gov general state website, there is a tab for, I think it's government. It gets to the legislature. In that legislative tab, there is links to the House and to the Senate, and in those tabs, there are links to calendars. Calendars come out, like I think Madeline said, Thursday nights, Fridays. Those give you the schedule for the upcoming weeks. The other thing that, again, as you get more knowledgeable about this process, there are dockets. So similar to what you may see at the PUC, there are dockets for each bill that you can actually go into and start to track particular pieces of legislation, to get that information as soon as possible. But you really have to spend some time on the state website, get a little bit more familiar with it, or call staff at the State House. They'll help you to try to track down what bill you're looking for and when that bill is going to be heard. Again, if you have a lobbyist, generally we can get that information sooner than most. So it is, but there are public ways to get it. It's a lot of digging. I'll be quite honest with you. It'll be a little bit of digging.
One other question about testifying at hearings. Would you agree that if someone is going to be testifying, that they should not only, articulate orally their position, but bring along something that's written so that it can get assembled into what we lawyers call, legislative history?
Yes. What's very important in terms for lawyers, legislative history. So obviously written testimony is always important. What's also really important that I think some people forget about is when that recommendation comes to the full House or the full Senate, there's going to be either a committee paragraph that explains what the legislature is meaning by passing that bill. The writing in that language is very important, as well as the speech that's given on the Senate floor. Those are, if something is challenged, will be looked to as to legislative history. So what's in the file, what's said or brought before the full bodies when they vote is always important. It's something that should always be thought of.
Yeah, thank you. We have, 15 seconds left, and so I just want to wrap this up. I want to encourage attendees to take a look at the NEWIEE website. We do have upcoming events. There's the Ask Me Anything series that NEWIEE hosts coming up on July 8th. It's with Sarah Burns, who's the former CEO of Central Maine Power. There's also the Women Shaping the Agenda event happening on July 23rd. That's from 3:30 to 5. Again, it's a virtual event, and it's promoting equitable access to clean energy and sustainable environment. And so with that, we are at our 5 o'clock, end of our session, but I really, really appreciate your informative insight and perspective. And again, attendees, if you want to reach out to any of our panelists, please do so, especially for, the net metering issue, but, the process as well can be kind of convoluted. So thank you, everybody, for a very successful panel discussion. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, attendees.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.